Now just look at these pictures. This is winter in Gaza, and its children are freezing in flooded tents, and many are lucky even to have a tent. Israel continues to restrict them, plus tarpaulins and temporary housing, which are vital after so many in the enclave have lost their homes in Israel's bombing campaign. Since the ceasefire came into effect in October, more than 300 Palestinians have been killed by Israel in Gaza, according to the United Nations. Meanwhile, Israel has revoked the licenses of 37 international NGOs working in Gaza and on the occupied West Bank, saying that they failed to meet requirements under new registration rules. MSF is one of those organizations, and its Secretary General, Chris Lockyear, is joining me now from Paris. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for having me on.
Chris Lockyear, what, are these new registrations? What have you failed to adhere to? What's going on?
Well, what we've been through is a very complex few days, and essentially what we've been told is that our registration is no longer valid. The accusation at the core of this situation is around providing information about our staff lists to the Israeli authorities. Now, let's put this a little bit in context. What we have amongst the absolutely catastrophic humanitarian situation that you were just talking about is a situation whereby there have been over 500 humanitarian workers who have been killed. 15 of our own workers have been killed, and we've been asked to provide information about our staff to the people who have killed our staff. And so we are in a situation of wanting to understand how this information is going to be used. At the core of this point, and we've been in discussion with the Israeli authorities for several months now, and we're still in conversation with the Israeli authorities. At the core of our point here is that we have an obligation to the duty of care to, as much as possible, the safety of our staff and our teams who are in every day providing essential humanitarian assistance to the population of Gaza. And that's really what is at the core of the issue here.
So let me just play devil's advocate, because you remember after October 7th, the Israeli government accused NGOs, and most notably the UN, of actually having Hamas members or affiliates or some kind of Hamas infiltration or hiring in their ranks. Obviously, the UN denied that, but that has been a thing with the Israeli government. Is that what they're saying to you? Is that what you think this is about?
Well, actually, what I think this is fundamentally about is about the manipulation and the instrumentalization of humanitarian assistance, and that's a factor that we've seen throughout this war. And I think what it is essentially is a distraction from the situation in the Gaza Strip. I mean, there has been, since this war started, over 70,000 people killed, over 170,000 people injured, as you were just saying, since the ceasefire, the violence continues on a daily basis. So I think it is about the manipulation of humanitarian assistance. Now, the accusations are coming. I would say at the moment there is a propaganda campaign against humanitarian organizations, against MSF, against dozens of other humanitarian organizations, which is essentially undermining the work that we do, and as a consequence, putting our staff and our activities in acute danger.
Christopher Lockyear, what happens if you, the 37 NGOs who deliver humanitarian aid, and essentially keep Gaza afloat, because that's all there is there, what happens when you're not there? Who will do what needs to keep body and soul together? Is the Israeli government going to do it? Are there other NGOs? What will happen to the people of Gaza?
Well, that's essentially our question too. I mean, let me put that a little bit in terms of context. As one of the dozens of humanitarian organizations who are still trying to operate in Gaza, because we do want to continue to be able to provide emergency medical assistance to the population of Gaza, in 2025 alone, MSF carried out 800,000 outpatient consultations. We treated 100,000 trauma cases. We supported 10,000 deliveries, and we provided over 700 million litres of water. We support 1 in 5 of the hospital beds in Gaza, and we support 1 in 3 of the mothers giving birth on a daily basis in Gaza. So that is just one of the many humanitarian organizations who are facing this awful situation at the moment. What we need to see in the Gaza Strip is an increase of humanitarian assistance, not a decrease of humanitarian assistance. And that humanitarian assistance is a fundamental obligation under international humanitarian law. It is not optional. It is not to be caveated or conditional. The people of the Gaza Strip need still a massive increase of humanitarian assistance, even despite the 90 days of ceasefire that we've seen recently.
Now, you gave us some numbers, very important numbers of your work there. We have these stats, and I want to put them up and read them. So MSF provides funding and international staff for 6 hospitals, runs 2 field hospitals and 8 primary healthcare centers, clinics, and medical points, runs 2 of Gaza's 5 stabilization centers, helping children with severe malnutrition, and treat, as you said, 100,000 trauma cases, perform surgeries on 10,000 patients, handled a third of Gaza's birth, has 60 international staffers in the West Bank and Gaza, and more than 1,200 local staff, mostly medical professionals. Now, that sounds like a lot. And of course, there are 37 groups that we're talking about. The Israeli government says you all represent, quote, only a small slice of aid delivery, and that Gaza can manage without them. Is that correct?
I fundamentally disagree with that point, and particularly if you look at the situation at the moment, as we've gone into the winter season, we're seeing an increase in diarrheal diseases, we're seeing an increase in respiratory infections in general. You know, there are 1.3 million people in need of emergency shelter that is not getting through. Now, there should be more. We could do more. The humanitarian community as a whole could do more if we're allowed to do that in an unrestricted way, which allows not just the supplies to come in, but our staff to able to be operate and flexible and provide assistance where it's most needed on a daily basis. So there is need for more, absolutely, and we can provide that. And as a humanitarian community in general, we can provide that more aid if the restrictions are lifted and we can have a predictable, solid, safe presence in the Gaza Strip.
Can I just ask you, because there are other requirements that Israel is making of you all, but I just want to know right now, because we see pictures, they're on social media. We still are not able to get in, which is an unacceptable situation that we continue to protest. But there are pictures that are coming out, and we are just sort of struck by how so many people, including children, are left sloshing around in freezing water, freezing dirty water. We're told that, for instance, the Al-Shifa hospital is having a hugely difficult time with kidney transplants, and many people, they say, are dying due to the lack of proper treatment. Just give me a sense of food, medicine, clean water, this kind of, specialized treatment like kidney dialysis. Is that being provided?
Well, I think what we need to realize is that there needs to be more of everything. So there needs to be more of the complex medical services, kidney dialysis. It can be complicated, if not impossible, to bring in basic support equipment, such as autoclaves, into the Gaza Strip, because they're seen as some of these dual items which are very complex and difficult to be able to bring in. They're often refused, often randomly, to be able to bring those in. At the same time, we're in a situation where you mentioned the food crisis there. There is still 76% of the population who are in food crisis in Gaza. So it is the whole breadth of medical services and humanitarian services in general, which are needed and needed now. It's really quite hard to be able to articulate the level of catastrophe that is still present in Gaza. And as I was saying originally, I think a lot of these conversations about registration is really distracting from what is the fundamental issue at the moment, which is that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is nothing short of catastrophic. The humanitarian organizations are providing a critical lifeline into the Gaza Strip. It is not enough. We can do more, but at the moment, it's being restricted further. Since January the 1st, we have not been able to bring in any supplies, and we have not been able to bring in any international workers into the Gaza Strip. So it's getting harder, not easier, but we need to be providing more and not less humanitarian assistance.
Okay, so I just need to ask you to follow up on what you said. You believe humanitarian aid and NGOs are being weaponized. That's what the word you used at the beginning of the interview. And I note also that Israel can also refuse registry to organizations or revoke their approval to work in Israel if they or their staff members publish calls to boycott Israel in the past 7 years, if there's a reasonable basis to assume that they oppose Israel's existence as a Jewish democratic state, if they incite racism or support armed struggle against the state of Israel, or actively advance delegitimization activities against the state of Israel, denying the Holocaust and the atrocities of Hamas attack on October 7th are also grounds to withhold approval. So have you ever had that kind of standard put before you, either in Israel or by other, governments who have their own political and ideological, missions?
No, I don't think so. I mean, what we are is a humanitarian medical organization. Our objective for over the last 50 years now is to be able to provide humanitarian assistance to patients who need it the most. And basically, that is it. That is our objective. We do also bear witness to what we're seeing in front of us. And what we have seen in front of us has in the Gaza Strip has been a catastrophic situation. We have seen over 70,000 people killed. There are not international journalists allowed to come into the Gaza Strip. We would highly advocate for that to be allowed, to be able to speak about what we're seeing. But those are our objectives, are to provide medical assistance to the people in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere in the world, in Sudan, in Yemen, in DRC, and when necessary, to talk about the horrors that we're seeing. And we have been seeing horrors in the Gaza Strip, and we continue to see people being killed and the medical implications of that on a daily basis.
Can I just ask you about the West Bank, where you also have, humanitarian staff there? There's just day after day reports of killings and injuries, of burning down and, destroying Palestinian farmland, olive trees, grazing cattle, the rest of it, or sheep, and grabbing land. What do you hear from your people that's happening on the occupied West Bank?
Well, it's as you describe, it is really a very horrible situation for the vast majority of Palestinians in the West Bank, and that is also becoming more complicated over the last few days as well. Since this registration issue has really come to the surface, it is becoming even harder for us to operate in the West Bank as well. So at the same time as the really catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, we're seeing it becoming harder and harder to be able to maintain our activities and our presence in the West Bank as well.
I just have a last one to ask you about Ukraine, because I think you just returned from Ukraine, close to the Eastern Front, where the situation is also catastrophic. It's freezing cold. The Russians are continuing their they're continuing to try, and they are pummeling the energy infrastructure, which obviously in the winter is even worse than it would be in any other time. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing over there, and what kind of aid is reaching people in Dnipro and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key dynamics at the moment that we're seeing is, as you were describing, is the attacks on the energy infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure in particular. I mean, there was one day where I visited two medical facilities, two hospitals, and an ambulance dispatch site, and all of them were under the sort of the terror of not knowing when the electricity supply would be cut off, or the ambulance site was operating in the dark. And so there is this really complicated situation whereby the humanitarian needs are being increased by the attacks on the energy infrastructure, and at the same time, they're being complicated by the attacks on the energy infrastructure as well.
Right, Chris.
There's also
Yeah.
questions in terms of the.
We're running out of time. I'm really sorry. I just wanted to get a last word on the Ukraine situation, and we'll keep following up, but especially on your situation with being deregistered for Gaza. Let's hope some humanitarian aid does actually get through, because they need it. Christopher Lockyear, thank you so much indeed, and we'll be right back.